Hello and welcome. I'm Nadira Tudor and you're watching W News, broadcasting live from the Al Arabiya News headquarters. These are our top stories. The United States gives Ukraine permission to use long-range weapons to strike deep into the heart of Russia, a day after the largest airstrike on Ukraine in almost 3 months. It's a significant shift for Joe Biden's current government, with a warning that the decision could lead to a potential World War III. Meanwhile, no word from President Putin yet, as Russian dignitaries imply the West's direct link with the conflict could lead to heightened confrontation. Ukraine's attack on Russia could take place within a matter of days as Washington grants permission to strike using long-range missiles. It's thought Ukraine will initially concentrate on the Kursk region against both Russian and North Korean forces. For more on this, I'm joined by our correspondent, Megumi Lim, who's in Kyiv. Megumi, let's expand on what the New York Times is reporting. They're speculating that Ukraine will be likely to use US-supplied missiles against both Russian and potentially 11,000 North Korean troops in the Kursk region, according to Ukrainian officials. Tell us more.
Well, first of all, experts are saying that this policy reversal by Washington is not going to be a game changer, but it will help Ukraine achieve a number of things. First of all, these US-made long-range ATACMS missiles, which is part of this policy change, has a range of about 300 kilometers. That is 190 miles. And experts are saying that they will be useful in striking air bases that are located deep inside Russian territory. These are air bases that house the very fighter jets, the strategic bombers that have been responsible for carrying out devastating missile attacks against Ukraine, just like the attack that we saw on Sunday, one of the biggest aerial attacks of the war, where Ukraine's Air Force said that more than 40 Russian fighter jets were launched to carry out this attack that killed and injured dozens of civilians and also struck Ukraine's energy infrastructure. Now, the second thing is that these long-range strikes will also be able to hit Moscow's military logistics hubs, which will, of course, cripple Russia's war machine. This is, of course, crucial for Ukraine. As we have seen, the latest is that Russia has massed a force of about 50,000 soldiers in its Kursk region, which includes reportedly 10,000 North Korean soldiers. And Russia is preparing to launch a major counteroffensive there to try to push out Ukrainian troops from its Kursk region, the 600 square kilometers of territory that Kyiv was hoping could be used as a potential bargaining chip if and when talks did take place with Moscow in the future. Now, the last thing is that experts are saying, also analysts are saying, that this policy change could also send a strong message to North Korea to not send any more North Korean soldiers to help in Russia's war in Ukraine. But also, in terms of, if we're talking about stockpiles, Ukraine has already used some of these ATACMS missiles against targets, military targets in Russian-occupied Crimea. And so we do not know how many ATACMS missiles Ukraine has left in their arsenal. And we also do not know whether the United States will be able to send more to Ukraine.
Thank you, Megumi. And it seems that this could be a crucial move, couldn't it, for the ability to reciprocate. And obviously, this development also affects other international players. Some will agree with the US administration and others won't. The UK and France have approved the use of long-range missiles, according to a Le Figaro report. How true is this, and why would they support such a move?
Well, the British and French militaries have already sent their long-range Storm Shadow and Scalp missiles to Ukraine. These missiles have a range of about 155 miles or 250 kilometers, which is less than the US-supplied ATACMS, but nevertheless, they can go for long distances. Already, British and French leaders have voiced support towards Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky's request to use these missiles, but they have been hesitating to lift restrictions because US President Joe Biden has not, in the past, did not want to lift restrictions on the US supplied ATACMS. And this has been sort of the direction that weapons policy has been headed. The US has been the benchmark for these policies, and countries like Britain and France has been looking to the United States for the signal or permission to lift these restrictions. However, this Le Figaro report that we saw earlier today has been retracted. We have not seen an official confirmation by neither Britain or France as to whether they've officially lifted restrictions. We are likely going to be seeing this policy change actually in the shape of an actual missile strike being launched by Ukraine against a Russian military target, as Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky said in his evening address on Sunday. He said the missiles will speak for themselves.
Okay, Megumi Lim there in Kyiv. Thank you very much for that update. Thank you. Kyiv and Washington have largely welcomed the US decision to allow Ukraine to use American-made long-range missiles to strike inside Russia. The stunning shift in US policy comes just ahead of a change of president, with Donald Trump vowing he'll end the war soon after taking office. Nick Harper reports from Washington.
A long-shot, long-range attempt to change the trajectory of the conflict. Ukraine will now have the ability to hit further into Russia, striking tactically important areas. In Kyiv, there's relief, but also questions as to why it took the US so long to give its approval.
It may mean additional points for Biden from his American voters, but for Ukrainians, this is a little too late.
It gives Kyiv greater range and strength, but most analysts don't see it swinging the war decisively in Ukraine's favor.
You are hugely limiting Russia's ability to mobilize against you and to attack. So it's an enormous step. The Ukrainians are hugely relieved, but it's not a game changer as far as the war is concerned.
The change in US policy comes just 2 months before Joe Biden leaves office. With Biden weeks away from his White House exit, this could be about trying to bolster his own foreign policy legacy. But with Donald Trump promising to stop military funding to Ukraine, this is also about shoring up Kyiv's stockpiles. Trump has vowed to end the war on his first day back in office. There's speculation he may force Ukraine to cede territory to Russia. One former US ambassador believes Biden's decision strengthens Kyiv's hand in potential peace talks.
You have to put your side in as strong a position militarily or tactically as possible. And of course, that would mean, you continue to provide support militarily in preparation for any kind of negotiated solution.
Western allies are expected to follow Washington's lead. The European Union's foreign policy chief is pushing more nations to agree.
I've been saying once and again that Ukraine should be able to use the arm we provided to them in order to not only to stop the arrow, but also to be able to hit the Arcas.
Tuesday marks 1,000 days of fighting, a milestone many never expected. Now, this long-range missile decision could push the conflict into even more dangerous and more unpredictable territory. Nick Harper, Al Arabiya News, Washington.
Well, for more on this, I'm joined from Washington by Ilya Ponomarev, a former Russian MP and political representative of the Russian Armed Resistance, which are groups of Russian exiles, just to explain, fighting with Ukraine against Putin. Welcome to the programme, Ilya. Now, Joe Biden's decisions to allow Ukraine to use US-supplied long-range missiles inside Russia is a huge policy shift. Why do you think this move has been made?
I think that Mr. Biden is concerned about his legacy. He was so many times accused of indecisiveness and passiveness and being slow in response to the challenges at the front lines, that he was always reacting on more and more escalation that is coming from Moscow, at the same time repeating mantras that he is against any escalation. So right now he wants to leave something behind him so that the new administration has to build on something.
It's a bold move, isn't it, to make that decision about the indecision, as you mentioned, 2 months before stepping down?
Frankly speaking, I think it really doesn't matter already at the moment, because it was discussed throughout the whole 2024, and throughout this year, Ukrainians have already developed long-range drone capacity, which is way, way, way longer strikes than what we are talking about right now. And Ukrainian drones can reach not only Moscow, it can reach even some locations in Urals, which is way further to the east. Obviously, ballistic missiles like ATACMS, they carry more explosives, but at the end of the day, I think that this decision has more symbolic meaning than the actual game changer at the field of battle.
Now, President Volodymyr Zelensky has reacted to the news now, a result for him, surely, as he's been pleading for more support to help him defeat Putin. What has his reaction been to the news?
Obviously, it was very reassuring because right now there are a lot of speculations in the global media, also fueled a lot by Russians, that America is about to give up on Ukraine and that the ceasefire is coming and that the ceasefire would be extremely unprofitable for Ukrainians. And even some people inside Ukraine, they start to say that we are about to face a betrayal of the global community on Ukrainians. And that's why this move obviously, brings some high spirits to the nation. And for that, we are very thankful.
Do you think it's bringing high spirits as well as hope?
Yes, that's absolutely true. And right now there is a debate what would in general happen in 2025. Right now, Putin is elevating pressure on Ukraine by attacking more and more energy infrastructure, and he understands that the winter is coming, so he wants Ukrainians to sit without power, without heat, without water. And obviously, every bits and pieces of inspiration is very helpful in these dark days.
Now, your group, the Free Russia Legion, understands Russia well, obviously, and you've been involved in several attacks into Russian territory. How do you think Kyiv will now use these weapons?
Well, I think that indeed, and that's what most likely Americans encourage Ukrainians to do, is to attack Northern Koreans, which were dispatched in Kursk region alongside the border. And I think that that's what would happen in the near future. But if we want to make a game changer in this war, we obviously need to attack the houses of the richest, the houses of members of Putin's elites, to generate split within the enemy's ranks, because right now everybody in Moscow considers this war as not something that threatens them personally.
There obviously are concerns within the international community about the war escalating further, and there will be a cost. Are we going to see the two sides, for 2 months now before, the US changes their leader, as it were, spiraling on both sides? Ukraine supported by the US and potentially other countries, Western countries, and Russia supported by North Korea and Iran until Trump takes that hot seat.
I think that those concerns, they are rather hypocritical, because what could be more than Ukraine entering the territory of Russia, the Kursk region, and keeping this territory under its control for already for it's fourth month of this operation, and no escalation happened. Russia did not react in any special way to it, besides just some empty threats which originally were that we will return the region under our control in a week. Then it was in a month. Now Putin said, okay, we'll try to return it by the time Trump gets into the office, or by the end of January. So they are pushing more of deadlines because they are unable to escalate. They do understand that the nuclear is not an option because it's suicidal for the current inhabitants of the Kremlin, but they have nothing else. So that's why it's just empty threats. And we need to understand that the only way to proceed and the only way to secure Europe, the only way to stop the bloodshed is by destroying Putinism.
Ilya Ponomarev, former Russian MP and political representative of the Russian armed resistance. Really fascinating and interesting to have you on the programme. Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
Biden's decision to support Ukraine's strike into Russia has been met with fury in Russia. The Russian government newspaper Rossiyskaya Gazeta called it the most provocative, uncalculated decision of his administration, which risks catastrophic consequences. For more now, I'm joined from Moscow by our correspondent Dasha Chernyshova. Dasha, really strong words there that we've seen in the response to this. Have we had a response from Putin about Biden's latest decision to allow Ukraine to use their long-range missiles in Russia? And if not, why not?
Well, we've heard the Kremlin saying that President Vladimir Putin has long outlined the Russian position, and that this decision to allow Ukraine to strike Russia with long-range missiles is actually another round of escalation, a very dangerous escalation that is taking place at the moment. We are hearing Moscow insist that that means increased NATO involvement into the conflict in Ukraine, because Moscow explains Ukraine is simply unable to use these types of weapons without the intelligence, without the surveillance, without the officers from these Western countries. So it means that these Western countries, the US in particular, is involved itself in this conflict, and this is changing the nature of this conflict. According to the officials at the Kremlin, they also know that because of the changed nature, there would be the changed response from the Russian side. They all say that this response, should these weapons actually be used in practice, this response will be appropriate to the new threats created.
This has been the narrative, hasn't it, that's been, before this decision was made, that has been suggested from the Russian administration for some time about NATO's potential involvement in this. Is there, however, any acknowledgement from the Russian administration that their actions might have been provocative and retaliation of this nature might perhaps have been inevitable?
Well, from the Russian side, it is the West that fails to understand the root causes of the conflict in Ukraine. And repeatedly, we hear the Russian officials insist that these are the root causes. This is the NATO encroachment and the larger issues concerning security architecture in Europe that have to be addressed and understood clearly by the Western politicians. And therefore, in Russia, this narrative has prevailed. At the same time, we have heard also the Western officials and the Western media all saying that this decision has been made in response to the allegations that North Korean troops could be used in Russia's Kursk region, in the area of the special military operation as well. And Moscow, with regard to that, has always been saying that it is not violating any sort of international sanctions when it comes to its partnership with North Korea, and also insisted that it is going to use, as it sees fit, the Article 4 of the Strategic Partnership Agreement that has been signed and ratified by Moscow and Pyongyang. So in Moscow, there is a very clear rhetoric that it is the Western countries that have to understand that they cannot pump up Ukraine with weapons forever, and that they will have to make sure that Ukraine gets to the negotiating table. While these decisions about the use of long-range weapons are not helping to get the negotiated settlement to the conflict, military and political analysts here have all been saying that instead of any chance of getting to the negotiating table, we have had some modest signs, such as the phone call between President Vladimir Putin and German Chancellor Olaf Scholz. All these modest steps could actually be in vain, because should Russia actually respond to this US decision, then certainly we are very far away from any prospect of ceasefire talks.
Given that the Russian administration is very clear about the rhetoric, how is the Russian media reporting this U-turn? State TV, Russia Today, etc. What's being said?
Well, the main line we are getting from the Russian media that it is a very dangerous and escalatory move on the part of the Western countries, but also they say that it was the move by the old outgoing administration in the United States, a sort of revenge for the new administration that will be coming in January, administration of Donald Trump, who had himself said that he could end this conflict in a day once he takes office. So the clear picture in the Russian media is that this is a sort of a calculated move in order to allow these negotiations to actually take place, not to allow the plans of Donald Trump to take shape in reality. And also they say that it is the legacy of Joe Biden that Donald Trump will have to deal with, and that's why the outgoing administration is trying to make it harder. That has been the main line we got from the Russian media.
Dasha Chernyshova in Moscow. Thank you very much for the update. Thank you. Let's take a look at some of the other stories making the news around the world. Israel's military has killed 20 Palestinians across the Gaza Strip today, including 6 people living in tents being used by displaced families. 4 people, 2 of whom were children, were killed in an Israeli airstrike in the area of Al-Mawasi, which is being used as a humanitarian zone. The others were killed in temporary shelters in Rafah. At least 8 people have died after Super Typhoon Manyi hit the Philippines over the weekend, resulting in landslides caused by strong winds and heavy rain. Manyi is the country's 6th storm to hit the area in the last month. Pollution readings in New Delhi have hit their highest number of the season today. As toxic smog continues to cover northern India, at least 11 flights were diverted, with airports and railway stations experiencing delays. The country's chief minister has called it a medical emergency. And Russian ballet dancer Vladimir Shekolярov has died after reportedly falling off a balcony building whilst under the influence of painkillers for a back injury. The 39-year-old principal dancer was one of the world's most talented ballet stars. The UK had been expected to follow the United States' decision to allow Ukraine to launch long-range missiles into Russia. But so far, a Downing Street spokesperson has refused to confirm an agreement had taken place. Now, we've heard murmurs about the UK possibly following in America's footsteps in supporting their use of their own Storm missiles. We have Olly Barratt here on the line now to give us an update. Olly, can you give us an update on that question?
Yeah, that's right. The Downing Street is still refusing to confirm or deny whether an agreement has been reached for the use by Ukraine of the Storm Shadow missiles that the UK and France could supply to the Ukrainians to strike targets deeper inside Russian territory. Now, it has been put to Downing Street this afternoon, reporting in the British media, which suggests that actually any delay in that regard is potentially coming from Washington rather than from London or Paris. The reporting in the British media is that it is Joe Biden's administration which is still hesitant in signing off the use of those British and French Storm Shadow missiles, which Kyiv is so keen to use, as I say, deeper inside Russian territory than it has been able to up to now. Downing Street insisting that one type of equipment isn't going to win the war, but not confirming or denying anything really about the status of the Storm Shadow ask from Kyiv. A spokesperson for the Prime Minister today saying that our support in Ukraine is ironclad and will continue on that basis. But when asked about the specifics of operational support, we won't get into speculation, said the spokesperson, or a commentary on operational discussions. We also heard from the UK Defence Secretary earlier, John Healey, who was asked about this very topic in the UK's House of Commons, and he also wouldn't get into those details, saying that if he did so, it could compromise operational security.
Well, it's clear that they're not willing to tell us either way then, is it, Olly? Well, we have also been hearing as well that Germany have been sending 4,000 drones, which Ukraine ordered from a company called Helsing in September, to Ukraine in a top-secret delivery, confirmed by the German Defence Secretary, Boris Pistorius. How significant is this?
I think that would be seen as significant by the Ukrainians, partly because of the types of drones that this signifies. They have the ability to use artificial intelligence when it comes to their direction. They can therefore be operational over long distances and crucially in difficult weather and conditions, and can even strike their targets even if communication with these drones is disrupted or lost in some way. So again, the Ukrainians will certainly see this as a boost to their efforts when it comes to the conflict with Russia. And it's the kind of thing, as I say, that the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has been asking for from Germany specifically, but from other Western allies. And we're seeing many of those Western allies really come together with fresh offerings for the Ukrainians, particularly with one eye on Washington and the knowledge that the Donald Trump presidency may take a slightly different stance to that which we've seen from Joe Biden during his period in the White House, during which the conflict has been ongoing. So just another example of Ukraine's allies trying to do what they can to step up with further support heading into the winter.
Olly Barratt in London, thank you for the update. Thank you. Chinese President Xi Jinping has vowed to work with the incoming US administration of Donald Trump as he held his final talks with outgoing President Joe Biden in Lima, Peru, where both leaders attended the APEC summit. President Xi Jinping told Biden that the issues of Taiwan, democracy, human rights and rights to develop are red lines for China and not to be challenged. Laura Westbrook is in Hong Kong for us. Laura, what was discussed at the meeting?
Well, this was essentially a farewell chat between President Xi Jinping and President Joe Biden. President Xi was really trying to lay down some guardrails, if you like, to the relationship. And he said that there were 4 red lines that, according to state media, should not be challenged. Now, these 4 red lines are that the US should not try to undermine the Communist Party's grip on power in China, that the US should not try to push China to become a democracy or try to contain China's economic rise, and perhaps most importantly, that the US should not support Taiwanese independence. Now, with an incoming Trump presidency, that does bring with it a lot of uncertainty. And so it does seem to appear that President Xi is trying to lay down some guardrails and send a clear message to Donald Trump on what his red lines are. Now, Joe Biden and Xi Jinping also discussed areas of cooperation, such as artificial intelligence, with both leaders agreeing on the need to maintain human control over any decision to use nuclear weapons. And for his part, Joe Biden also pressed President Xi Jinping to use his influence with Russia to prevent a further expansion of the war in Ukraine.
President Xi is now in Brazil for the G20 meeting. What can we expect there?
Well, in Peru, President Xi sought to shore up ties with a range of US allies and partners, and he's set to continue a bit of a charm offensive and more talks with more of them at the G20 in Rio de Janeiro. In Peru, he warned that the global economy was fracturing as protectionism spreads, so he's really trying to cast himself as a protector of free trade. This comes as US President-elect Donald Trump is set to take office. He's threatening 60% tariffs on China and 10 to 20% on the rest of the world. And so with these global tariffs, it does appear to give President Xi a bit of an opening to try to improve relations with other governments and build on existing ties. Now, according to state media, President Xi expressed his readiness to work with all parties to create a multipolar world and for inclusive economic globalization. He also added on his hopes that the G20 could play a greater role in international economic cooperation.
Laura Westbrook in Hong Kong, thank you. Let's have a look at some of the business headlines now. The Russia-Ukraine conflict over the weekend has affected the cost of oil as prices increased today. Brent crude futures were up 55 cents, that's $71.59 a barrel, whilst US West Texas Intermediate crude futures were up 43 cents, that's $67.45 a barrel. Meanwhile, the price of olive oil across Europe is expected to halve in the coming months. Spanish company Diolelo, which owns brands like Bertolli and Carbonell, said droughts and extreme heat in southern Europe had been affecting production costs. Record-breaking 80 million Americans are expected to travel for Thanksgiving next week, according to travel group AAA. 1.7 million more people will make the journey on Tuesday, the 26th of November to Monday, the 2nd of December, compared to last year. In sport, Tottenham Hotspur player Rodrigo Bentancur has been slapped with a 7-match ban after making an alleged racist remark about his South Korean teammate Son Heung-min. The midfielder was previously charged by the FA in September after giving an interview on the Uruguayan TV channel Canal 10 in June. And tennis star Rafael Nadal says he will not become distracted with emotion as he prepares to bid farewell during this week's Davis Cup. The former world #1 and 22-time Grand Slam champion will retire from the sport after representing Spain at the men's team event in Malaga. Let's give you a reminder of today's top stories. The United States gives Ukraine permission to use long-range weapons to strike deep into the heart of Russia, a day after the largest airstrike on Ukraine in almost 3 months. It's a significant shift for Joe Biden's current government, with a warning that the decision could lead to a potential World War III. Meanwhile, no word from President Putin, as Russian dignitaries imply the West's direct link with the conflict could lead to heightened confrontation. That's it from all of us at W News. Thanks for watching. Stay tuned now for Tom Burgess-Watson with GNT. Good night.